long time. Let's talk to Dr. Calum Miller, who's a medical doctor and a research associate at the University of Oxford. Doctor, good evening to you. This must be appalling news, I would have thought, to the medical profession.
Good evening to you as well. Well, I think there's been a lot of misinformation kind of thrown around about what this ruling originally involved, Roe v. Wade in 1973. What it effectively said was that abortion should be made legal across the entire country up until and during birth for any reason whatsoever. And so I think whatever you think about abortion generally, you might support abortion in the first trimester, you might not. Whatever you think about that, I think everyone really can welcome the fact that it's not going to be available up until birth for any reason in at least some of the country now. I think that's a humane common sense.
So you could have an abortion literally just before 9 months, you could kill the baby. That was legal, was it?
It was legal across the country and still is in half the country, and even during birth. There was a partial birth abortion procedure, which was only outlawed maybe 15 years ago.
Well, that would be murder here, wouldn't it? In this country, that would be murder.
Well, let's hang on, Calum. Let's restrict ourselves not to that. Let's restrict ourselves to the fact a lot of women become pregnant in a situation when they really can't afford to have a child, don't want to have a child. It wasn't in their life plan. And the best thing for them is to have the child or the group of cells, whichever you like to look at it, got rid of as soon as possible. So the earlier an abortion can be carried out, the better. What are your thoughts on that?
I suppose my thought is that the best option really is to empower women who are in a difficult position to be able to have their child that in many cases they want to have without having to make them choose between their financial situation and their child.
Are you, sorry, Calum. Are you looking for a job in politics? Because if you are, I think you might do very well, but not with me. So here's the question, Calum.
I don't think I'd enjoy it.
Here's the question, Calum. Don't smile. Here's the question. Okay. Under what circumstances, as a doctor, would you be prepared to carry out an abortion?
I like most doctors actually in the UK and in the US and in most countries, I would not perform an abortion. And that's true of the majority of the medical profession.
No, it's not.
It is only a tiny, in the US, only 7% of obstetricians do abortions.
I'm sorry, but it isn't. I have spoken to a couple of ladies today who've had abortions, didn't want to come on the show for reason. I don't know why you smile. You know, to be quite honest, people like you who take this sort of attitude, who think you're smug and superior to everyone else, really piss me off. So I suggest you don't smile at me. This is an incredibly serious subject, and some women's lives will be completely and utterly ruined by it. They don't want to have a child. They mistakenly become pregnant, and people like you want to force them to have a child. The future that child may have could be horrendous. Surely it's got nothing to do with you, me, Ash, or any other bloke. It has to do with the woman concerned, and that should be it. If she wants to have an abortion, fine. The sooner the better. Nobody wants to talk about late abortion. That is disgusting and appalling, unless, of course, there's a real, very serious medical problem. Abortion should be carried out in the first few weeks, as soon as somebody knows that they are pregnant and they don't want the child. And people like you in the medical profession who seem to think it's funny and smugly go on about it, I suppose you'll be telling me next you're a Christian.
Well, I think you know that I'm not being smug or laughing about abortion itself.
No, I don't know, actually.
I think it's obvious you're being dishonest about that, frankly. I think you know that I'm not laughing about abortion. I was laughing because you said something that was absurd, and it's simply false to suggest I was doing anything else. So please try and be honest. We're trying to have an honest conversation, and you're making that very difficult.
You're not trying to have an honest conversation at all. What is driving you? Is it a religious belief that is driving you?
No, I actually became pro-life in medical school because I came to the view that all human beings, regardless of how old they were, how big they are, should have their lives protected in law, because they're
even an hour after sex. I mean, if you get the morning after pill, you would consider that abortion and it should be allowed to continue.
The morning after pill usually doesn't cause an abortion, so that would be...
But it would stop the pregnancy, wouldn't it?
Contraception stops pregnancy, but is different to
abortion. I'm talking about the morning after pill. Are you against the next day taking a morning after pill? Because that would have...
Yeah, like I said, The morning after pill usually doesn't end an existing pregnancy. It usually prevents a pregnancy. In rarer cases, there's a potential possibility it could end a pregnancy.
Well, what's your view on that then? If there's cells and within 2 or 3 days, what's your view on that being destroyed by a morning after pill? Because there's no actual sentient being, is there, at that point?
Well, my view is that human beings are biological things. We are human beings. We are a biological member of our species. And it doesn't matter how intelligent we are, how developed we are. All of us have different levels of intelligence and development, but all of our lives are equal regardless of how developed we are. And I think, although it can seem unintuitive, I think the only consistent way that we can think about human equality is to apply it to every human being, even if that can seem counterintuitive.
You've become a professor, and you actually believe that sort of rubbish, do you? You actually believe the rubbish that has just come out of your mouth. Don't smirk at me again. Listen, you don't have any thought for the woman whose life could be absolutely ruined by being made to have a child, which is what will happen. And what will happen also is that women, young girls probably as well, will go and seek backstreet abortions, which can be very dangerous. Yeah. Very dangerous.
That's true.
This is such a backward step. And the support of the medical profession, or some of the medical profession, absolutely astounds me.
Well, I think, the consensus among biologists is that life begins at fertilization, and that's my belief because it's a biological fact. I don't think that's nonsense at all. I very much have immense thought for the woman who's in this situation, and that's why, as the pro-life movement, we have many, many pregnancy resource centres giving practical support to women rather than just abortion. The abortion providers very rarely give practical support to women, but in the US, there are 3,000 crisis pregnancy centres run by pro-lifers giving them practical support so that they have a real choice, that they can keep their baby as well as keep their financial stability and their career. And that, I think, is the most empowering.
But what would you say? I mean, I remember there was a lady about 20 years ago who had 8 babies, and they knew they would all die if she didn't have some aborted, and she refused to, and they did all die. Would you support for some to be aborted early to allow some to live? I mean, what would your view? Because they'll all die, and that is what happened.
I think those situations are very difficult. I think almost all pro-lifers, including myself, think that abortion should be permissible to at least save some lives, including the mother's life, rather than losing all the lives. So these situations are inevitably complex, but I certainly wouldn't support a complete ban on abortion, even where somebody else's life is at risk. And I think you should try and save as many lives as possible.
Right.
And so, going back to my original point that you skirted round, which is that you're quite happy to allow a child then to be born to somebody who is probably mentally not capable of bringing up a child, who is not mentally interested in bringing up a child, who is more concerned about their life and not having a child, you would force them to have it. That's great. You're a really good guy, aren't you?
Well, I appreciate the sarcasm, but I think ultimately everyone agrees that abortion should be limited at some point. And I think you agreed earlier that abortion should be limited later in pregnancy. And what that shows is that
as long as it is, as long as it's, there's not a danger to the mother or to a danger to whatever. There will be times when a child dies during birth. Unfortunately, there will be times when a mother dies during birth. But no, I wouldn't be in favour of that being a regular thing. We're not talking about that. We're talking about women who suddenly decide, usually at a fairly young age, and some at an older age, where they feel they're too old to have any more children. They don't want to have any more children. They've decided that isn't the way their life is going to go. Somebody in their 50s wants to have an abortion. I would have hoped everybody would have done everything they could to make sure that happens as soon as possible. I just do not understand. I just imagine that there is some kind of religious thing driving you somewhere. Answer me this question. What do you feel about the people? I talked to somebody who had an abortion not long ago, and they said the abortion was fine. It was not a problem. They've never had any thoughts about it. It was easier than having a tooth taken out. The only thing that really disturbed them and upset them for some time were the ignorant idiots standing outside calling her a murderer.
Well, I I would love to speak to them in full. I don't think it's fair to just say one sentence on them to television. I'd like to hear what they have to say and listen to them in sincerity and have a conversation with them. But one thing I would say is that their experiences are not necessarily representative of every woman. We know that it's common to have post-traumatic stress disorder after an abortion. We know that women who have an abortion have higher rates of suicidal thoughts, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, and anxiety than women who continue an unwanted pregnancy.
I know two ladies who've had a couple of abortions, maybe 30 years ago, and are perfectly fine. It depends on the individual. But if somebody wants to have an abortion, and I'm not using the term termination, I'm using the term abortion because the pro-lifers seem to love to talk in all kinds of nasty language. I just find it almost impossible to believe there are people in the medical profession like you who would make a woman suffer because she doesn't want to have a child. I find that despicable. I don't know how you can live with it.
How could you force them to have the baby as well?
Well, this is the point I was trying to explain earlier, but you interrupted, which is to say that everyone agrees that at some point in pregnancy there should be limitations on abortion. And what that means is, in other words,